The following program is a special presentation of the Big Ten Network, produced in association with the University of Wisconsin.
In his first 100 days, President Obama has been busy. He's pushed through a $787 billion stimulus package, announced that he will close Guantanamo Bay, lifted the ban on stem cell research, traveled to Europe, and got a new dog. Can Obama keep up this pace, or will tough battles over the economy, healthcare, and foreign policy slow his momentum? How does this record compare to previous presidents? Does it tell us anything about the next 1,360 days? Join us next during office hours. Hi, I'm Ken Goldstein, professor of political science here at UW-Madison. Few presidents have faced the immediate challenges that Barack Obama encountered when he took office January 20th. An economy in peril, 2 wars, and high expectations from an anxious citizenry. Joining us today during office hours to discuss and assess the first 3 months of the Obama administration are 2 University of Wisconsin political science professors. Charles Franklin is an expert on public opinion and electoral behavior and co-founder of pollster.com. David Canon specializes in the study of Congress and political institutions. Gentlemen, Charles, David, welcome. So it may not be the best way to open up our show on 100 days, but let's talk a little bit about whether 100 days is important. What does it mean? What does it tell us? Is it a tell for future performance of the president? David?
Well, since the time of FDR, historians have looked at the first 100 days as kind of a benchmark assessment of how presidents are doing for the first time in office. And FDR obviously set the very high benchmark of performance, passing 15 bills, restoring confidence in the banking system, getting people back to work, and really accomplishing quite a bit in the 100 days. No president since then has really met that mark, and Obama, while a comparison's been made to FDR, certainly wouldn't be meeting that standard. Yet you'd have to say he has accomplished an awful lot in his first 100 days with the stimulus package, with progress being made on the financial crisis, and also then setting his budget in motion and other efforts getting started anyway.
We'll come back and compare Obama's performance to the performance of some recent presidents, but you mentioned FDR. Right. And one of the things that FDR did, aside from the particular bills that he passed, was turn around mood in the country. Right. So I think we're going to put up a graphic here, which I'd like Charles to speak to, that talks about the change in the mood in the country, not only since Obama took office, but speak to us a little bit about that.
That's right. Over the last 8 years, and a little bit into the Clinton administration, actually, the percentage of people thinking the country's headed in the right direction has been declining. And it reached its low points in the end of the Bush administration when right direction fell down to around 10 to 15%, historic low levels. That mood of the country indicator started to change with Obama's election. It didn't wait for his inauguration. Mm-hmm. And so we see the trend in right direction stop going down and start coming up right in November, and it's continued straight on up through the inauguration in the first 3 months. At the same time, of course, the wrong direction has come down as well. And so what that shows is the shift in the mood of optimism that things may not be good yet, but there's more hope for them getting good. Now, of course, a lot of that is Democrats being satisfied to have a Democratic president, but they're bringing along a lot of independents with them, and the Republicans are relatively pessimistic, not surprisingly, but not so much so as to prevent this sharp change in trend.
Okay. Let's also put up a graphic now that looks at how Obama's favorability ratings in the first 100 days compare to President Bill Clinton and President George W. Bush. Can you put that into context for us as well?
The 3 of them started their administrations more or less in the middle of the pack of all post-war presidents. But with Obama running a bit ahead, Eisenhower and Kennedy, for example, were above Obama. But of the last 12 or 14 years, the Obama administration has come in a little bit higher than the other 2. Through that first 100 days, Clinton trended down a little bit, Bush trended up a little bit, with Obama staying a few points, single digits, 5 points maybe ahead. Here in the last 2 weeks, Obama's gotten a bit of a lift, perhaps partly from his foreign travels and partly from the 100 days coverage that we ourselves are part of, and that's separated him a little bit. But the one important thing is to remember the relationship between the approval level of a president at 100 days and when they leave office is exactly 0.
Okay. Speak to me a little bit about that, David. I may know that you're a poker player. Is this 100-day rating, Charles suggested it's not much of a tell of what's going to happen down the line. Bill Clinton had a real tough first 3 months.
Right.
What does it really tell us?
Yeah, so one thing that approval really matters for is to help bargaining power with Congress. That a president who, like President Bush was when he left office in the high 20% range, obviously no one in Congress is listening to him. If you're up in the 65 to high 60s, then people in Congress are going to say, boy, we're going to have a tough time going against this president because folks back in our district like him. And so there will be more leverage that the president will have, especially in his own party, of course, and has not had much success with the Republicans we'll talk more about later. But having a high approval does give the president a stronger basis for arguing for his legislative package in Congress.
So in a way, this approval rating is the gas or the juice that the president uses in Congress.
Right. Right.
Let's speak a little bit about about Clinton and George W. Bush, putting it in perspective. So remind us what happened in those first Clinton 100 days.
Well, Clinton had a rough start. Because he had the flap over gays in the military. It was a campaign promise he made to lift the ban on gays in the military. Ended up with a compromise that neither side liked, the don't ask, don't tell policy the military didn't like and the gay rights activists didn't like. His stimulus package fell flat, ended up not passing in the first 100 days. So he was really, and he did have unified control of Congress, like Obama does. Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate when he came in, but yet he was having a tough time even getting some of the basic parts of his package through. Now he did end up passing the major budget bill with some tax increases and so on that did, at least Democrats would argue, put us on the path towards economic recovery, but that came a bit later.
Okay. We're going to take a break now. When we come back to Office Hours, we're going to continue with our discussion of President Obama's first 100 days. Stay with us.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
For more than 100 years, the University of Wisconsin has been inspired by the Wisconsin idea,
which says the good work of the university extends to the boundaries of the state and beyond.
So the UW works hard to help build Wisconsin's economy.
Educate people of all ages.
Advance health and medicine.
And enhance the quality of life for all of us.
Hit it!
The University of Wisconsin-Madison. Forward thinking.
Welcome back to Office Hours. We're talking with political scientists Charles Franklin and David Canon about politics today and Obama's first 100 days. So Charles, in the first segment, we were talking about the wrong track, right direction number. And you made the point that some of that was Democrats who'd been out of power now thinking a Democrat had won. Now things were, in fact, going in the right direction. Talk to me a little bit more about that and the structure of the electorate.
Sure. Well, there's certainly an element of just partisans changing. Democrats getting happy, Republicans getting less happy, independents so far being pretty happy. But there's also the shift in partisanship that we've seen taking place over the last 4 years or more. Republican identification was at a high point around the 2004 election where there were slightly more Republicans in the electorate than there were Democrats. And that was itself a change from the 1960s and 70s and 80s even. But in the time since then, starting with President Bush's re-election in 2004, we've seen steadily declining Republican identification and a slow but upward creep in Democratic identification. So what had been parity between the two parties now puts the Democrats at somewhere between a 7 and maybe as much as a 12-point advantage in party identification. So that's the other side of the Republican disadvantage right now, not only bearing the burdens of the economy and 8 years of Republican administration, but also with a shrinking base of support to begin with.
Behind the numbers, behind the curtain, structurally, that's a pretty big story.
It's quite a large story. It's one of the biggest moves we've seen in party identification since World War II, and it's taken place in a relatively short period of time. this is not about one generation replacing another, of the New Deal generation dying off and being replaced. Instead, this is voters changing their minds and largely moving out of Republican and into independent identification, and some independents moving into Democratic identification.
So part of the political equation is President Barack Obama comes in, runs, wins. He gets to face Republicans, and it's a little bit of a dilemma for Republicans how they act. We went out and asked students to ask us some questions, so let's go out to University of Wisconsin and have a student question about how Obama's dealing with Republicans.
Hi, I'm Rachel and I'm a senior, and my question is, President Obama came to office with promises to have Washington work more closely with Republicans. Is he succeeding in doing this?
David, you want to take that?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you've been following some of the votes in Congress, you know he's not attracting any Republican support. The stimulus package, passed with virtually no Republican support in the House or the Senate. The budget looks like it's going to head in the same direction. So the question is exactly correct that he campaigned on the promise of creating a more nonpartisan politics, not even bipartisan, but more nonpartisan. He really wanted to work hard to bring the Republicans on board. But as the saying goes, it takes two to tango. And the Republicans made it clear from the beginning they were not happy with some of the proposals, and they've been working very actively to resist Barack Obama's policies. And this is in stark contrast, by the way, to FDR's situation in 1933-34, where he had strong Republican support on a lot of the major bills that passed. In fact, of those 15 bills that he passed in the first 100 days, a lot of those were on voice votes, just almost unanimous voice votes, which is incomprehensible today, given the polarized nature of partisan politics in Congress.
So Charles, from a strategic standpoint or a political standpoint, this is a really difficult position the Republicans are in. So they're Republicans. They disagree with Democrats. That's perfectly honorable. On the other hand, we've also seen how Republicans have shrunk, and it's going to be difficult for Republicans to win nationally if that trend continues. But that also means that those Republicans that are still Republicans are pretty conservative.
That's right. The size of the party has shrunk, which means that you're sort of distilling the base of the party. Senator Specter just left the Republican Party for the Democrats. Why is he doing that? In part, it's because of the shrinkage of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania, but it's also because the people who are left in the Republican Party are even less likely to support a moderate senator such as Specter, and that poses a real dilemma for the party. I think what we're seeing is fairly typical of a party after it's been damaged badly in 2 elections in a row. It's both searching for its new direction, but at the same time, coupled with this shrinking base, it's one that's much harder to find what the new direction is. I will say this, I think things are never as bad as the party in trouble thinks they are, and they're never as good as the party in power thinks they are. And so before we write the obituary for the Republican Party, we should remember how Richard Nixon brought back a party destroyed by Goldwater in '64, how Ronald Reagan rallied a party in the aftermath of the Watergate scandals and so on. So I think there's certainly too early to write the party off. And it's important to realize that the party's got to spend some time finding how it shapes that base, but also where are the creative politicians that can find the party a way onto a new road that doesn't alienate the base, but also starts to attract people who are going to be dubious about the large spending, large deficits of the Obama administration.
And things move quickly in politics. And we'll be back quickly on Office Hours, continue our discussion of politics today, Obama's first 100 days, and what's going to happen in Congress down the line. Stay with us.
Consider this. There's a public university that consistently ranks among the top in the number of Peace Corps volunteers and in the number of graduates serving as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, whether they are leading corporations or changing the world. The next time you see people doing extraordinary things, they are probably Badgers. The University of Wisconsin-Madison. Forward thinking.
Welcome back to Office Hours. We're discussing politics, Obama's first 100 days with Charles Franklin and David Canon, members of the Political Science Department here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So David, unexpected what the president is going to face on a daily basis, which is one of the reasons why the 100 days, it's hard to know what's going to happen afterwards. And with Charles, we were discussing how Republican members of Congress are a bit constrained because of what the base, real Republican adherence identifiers want them to do. Obama's also got some issues there. Tell me a little bit about this last week. There was the torture memos came out, and that's putting in Obama a little bit of rock in a hard place with his base, Democratic, on the left.
Right, absolutely. It was a tough situation for Obama to deal with, and I think it's an interesting case because it really shows Obama in his sort of true colors, which I think is a sort of a pragmatic problem solver. He's not an ideologue. He really wants to figure out the best way to get something done. And for this issue, he's wanted to go away. He wanted to be able to address it kind of head on, say, you know, we're not going to torture people anymore, but we're going to look to the future. We're not going to prosecute people from the Bush administration that may have been responsible. And he wanted just to deal with it in that way, solve the problem, move on. Well, the left is having none of it. They want heads to roll. They want people to go to jail. And so they were not at all happy with this response to say, well, we're not going to prosecute anyone. They called for hearings. They wanted a full investigation. And so he's got some grumbling right now on the left. I think they're going to probably have to go with what Obama's proposing, which is some hearings, investigate more, but still no prosecution. But that's, you're right, it's definitely taking some heat from the base on that one.
You study Congress. Obama wants this issue to go away so he can talk about other things. Democratic leadership really wants this issue to go away, right?
Well, right, because Nancy Pelosi is one of the people who've been briefed on this. And so when they talk about putting people in jail, you know, she'd probably be, you know, up there on the list of, you know, the dozen or so people who knew this was going on when she was being briefed. That's right.
Talking about Obama's approval numbers, there's been a whole flurry of polls around the 100 days, and I'll show him sort of solidly in that 60 range, which is an impressive number. Presidential approval is usually a pretty direct function of the performance of the economy. Right. Obama seems to be benefiting from people's either optimism or future assessments about the economy. That's a little bit of an unusual situation, isn't it?
Right. When a new president comes in, they're obviously not held responsible for what happened before their watch. And so a new president lives or dies by inspiring a confidence that they're going to govern well, and in particular, under economic bad times like we have, get us out of them. But the relationship between how the economy is really doing and Obama's approval is going to get stronger and stronger over the next 18 months leading into the midterm elections. Really, it's about 18 months from now that the rubber's going to meet the road, and the question is, at that point, will the public look back and think Obama governed well? Ronald Reagan's a great example of that. The economy fell throughout Reagan's first 2 years, and he was badly damaged in the midterm elections, then turned it around going into his re-election in '84. Obama has to wonder, is he going to be like Reagan, falling through the midterms in 2010, or will he bring it back?
We'll be right back on Office Hours with Charles Franklin, David Canon, look into our crystal ball and see what we think is going to happen in the next 1,360 days of the Obama administration. Stay with us.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
Welcome back to Office Hours. We're with Professor David Canon, Professor Charles Franklin of the Political Science Department here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we've talked a lot about President Barack Obama's high approval ratings. Here, we have a question from a student. Let's keep that high approval rating in mind as we listen to this question from Maria.
Hi, I'm Maria. I'm a junior at UW-Madison, and I was just wondering, President Obama so far hasn't taken many political risks, and I was wondering what issue he would take a risk on next.
So we hear presidents often talk about their approval rating is their political capital, their juice, if you will. When do you think Barack Obama is going to start to use a lot of this political capital, or is he already using this political capital?
Well, he used it to get things through, the stimulus bill, now the budget. So there's certainly some value to it, as David was saying earlier about high approval. But I think the critical question is, when will he go against Democrats in Congress? He's talked about restraining programs, cutting programs, and so on. The $100 million that he asked the cabinet to cut is not even as much as a down payment on that. So it remains to be seen where he will offend some Democratic constituencies.
Where do you see that coming, David? Is it's not in health care, maybe it's cap and trade?
Cap and trade's one, immigration reform is another one. When he mentioned a couple weeks ago that that was still on the table for this session of Congress, a lot of people are shaking their heads like, wait a minute, why is he taking this on? This is clearly a divisive issue that divides both Democrats and Republicans. And so there might be an answer to Maria's question that, you know, here is he's taking on an issue that is controversial. He will have to spend a lot of political capital on that. That's why a lot of people thought that was maybe not a good idea. They should keep the eye on the prize, more on the economy, the various issues in foreign policy, still has to deal with Iraq and Afghanistan. To bring in something like immigration that is going to be divisive, have to spend a lot of capital, that might not be the best move at this point.
You study the presidency, teach courses on the presidency here at UW. The fact of the matter is, when the president gets up in the morning, what he's doing is often out of his control. So last week they didn't have a meeting saying we're going to be talking about swine flu for the next week.
Right. No, absolutely. There are things that you absolutely can't predict. And a lot of how presidents are judged, especially I think by history, is how you deal with those really unexpected crises that come up. One of President Bush's downfalls was Hurricane Katrina. You know, obviously you don't plan for hurricanes, and they completely muffed that one and did a terrible job of handling that. And he really never recovered from that after the mishandling of Hurricane Katrina.
In terms of presidents' favorability ratings, you said that Obama is going to be judged on the economy, but these presidential favorability ratings are also either positively or negatively can be hugely influenced by these events which, listen, we have no idea what they're going to be 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line.
Right. One of the things you're hiring with a new president is crisis management, and the crisis that you don't see coming, and how do you deal with it? That's why the swine flu issue is one that's caught the public's attention. We don't know whether it's going to turn out to be terrible, pretty mild, whether it's going to linger for a long time or disappear in a hurry. So how the administration handles that's really critical for Obama sustaining his support, or with a major administrative misstep, damaging that support. It all depends on what they do with it.
It all depends on what they do with it. Charles, David, thanks so much for joining us today on Office Hours. We look forward to talking with you every couple hundred days over the next couple years and keeping track of politics with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So that's all the time we have today in Office Hours. Just a reminder to watch all of our shows and get more information on any of the topics covered this season. Please go to our Office Hours website. It's officehours.poli.wisc.edu. Thanks for joining us. See you again on Office Hours.
The preceding program was produced by the University of Wisconsin in association with the Big Ten Network.